I had a conversation with Mo Gawdat, wonderful mind, best-selling author. He has a life mission of making 1 billion people happy. He's an important voice for the industry. He's a wonderful soul. Mo warned us of the impact on humanity. And the question I asked Mo was, and that's today, by the way, that's today. Give this 1 year and God.
Artificial intelligence is a nuclear weapon capable of creating other nuclear weapons.
And generative search is unlocking just that.
Catty's verdict, what we saying?
I just couldn't watch it. It's excruciating. I think it's a trend we see in tech.
Oh, you've got steam coming out of your ears. I can see steam. Is that because it's so cold? Why is steam coming out of your ears? In this week's Memes and Machines, we dive into artificial intelligence. We talk about search, the creative process, generative AI, automation, Apple, their product launch, spatial computing, the frontier of hardware, something we have not seen in over a decade, disappoints. If you are interested in technology and AI, this is the episode for you because I bloody enjoyed that conversation.
As always, our weekly weather updates on New York and the north of England.
We're so British. We are so British. We do talk about the weather. I'm surprised that someone hasn't called that out. Catman, good to see you. I am thrilled you're not a snowman. I was expecting you to come with icicles on your face or something of that nature.
How you doing, man? Yeah, I wore my Guinness boots today, so that helped me get to the office in a snowy New York. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Tell me the wind chill is just killing you.
It's brutal. You don't want to step outside for longer than 2 minutes. So I'm in here recording a podcast with you.
Good man. I remember one time where I was really excited about a pitch we were going to do in Chicago. And it was at a time when Chicago had record lows in temperature. And you know, in America, you can go on a treadmill or in a cab and there's like news playing everywhere. Everywhere's filled with adverts and everywhere's got some form of editorial or news playing. And I was on a treadmill doing a little jog and they were talking about the Chicago kind of record low temperatures. And as I was going to get on a plane the day after, the headline was, "Don't step outside or death." You had something like 15 minutes before you died. So there was still part of me was, I really want to go. And then lucky for my own life, the client cancelled the meeting, was like, yeah, we probably should cancel this. But I was willing to go. I will put that on the record that I was willing to face death for a pitch that I really wanted to do.
Was the days before Zoom?
Yeah, it was. This was a day when you did everything in person.
Yeah.
Everything in person. And not because we had to. Zoom was available, Hangouts was available. But that's not how you did business, Catman. You would have to get on the flight and you would fly to another state and you'd show up and you'd do all the little small talk and the formalities and then you'd get into it. What a wonderful life. Rarely. We used to be a formidable pairing.
We did, you're right.
We did. I would say seldomly we lost. When we were on form, when we didn't do our best work, we'd lose. But when we really wanted something, I tend to think, the team we had, we had some good eggs around us.
We did. We were beating agencies that were 10 times our size. I think that's always a good signal.
Oh yeah. It was. We were always outsiders. We were the fringe choice. I'm going to say the charming Brits that were trying to take on in America, the risky bet that you kind of wanted to do, the fling that you probably know you shouldn't have. That's how I would describe our New York soirees.
Dude.
Cool. Dude, I want to tell you about my week because I think there's two interesting things that came out of it. So I've had a chaotic week, amazing highs, lows, and everything in between. One of the things I did yesterday was I spoke at a conference, and it was an industry event for hoteliers. So think of all hotel groups and the hospitality industry leading figures coming together. And I was there to inspire and inform about AI and how this can influence the industry and why companies in the room should pay attention. And what was really interesting, I came out of that process going, the hotel industry is typically very slow moving. If you think of the hotel industry, they put brochures online, and they still do that today. And they have this over-reliance on companies and marketplaces like Booking.com. But if I think about what's happening in the technology space, specifically generative AI, they are potentially one of the biggest benefactors of all of this innovation. We talk a lot about language barriers being removed. How beneficial could that be for the hotel, the hospitality and travel industry? We talk about automation and removing air and friction and doing a lot of the tasks that we don't need to now rely on a person. Again, the hospitality and travel industry could be benefactors. And fundamentally, we say how technology can augment our world and create better experiences. And again, the hospitality industry should be able to take advantage. So my question to you, how would you advise a typically slow-moving industry to think about technology, and what steps should they take to A, get some enthusiasm, and B, start taking advantage of all this cool new, shiny new toys that are available to all of us?
Yeah, I think the hotel industry is really interesting. I think especially right now, I think there's a huge opportunity because Airbnb is kind of losing its stronghold on the travel consumer. I think the fees have kind of gone out of control, and actually the quality control is significantly lower. Like staying in a hotel now is a 10 times better experience, I find, than staying in an Airbnb, and the cost is pretty much the same, which it didn't used to be. But I feel like there's this kind of shift happening where I personally will go first to like a boutique hotel before I go to Airbnb. And I think they're the industries that probably spend the most amount of time on processes and processes within their business that are incredibly manual and take a huge amount of time and a huge amount of effort and resource that we're probably at the stage now could have been replaced 5 or 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just being very kind of open to the idea that things could be done differently. And like you said, how do we start using bots, automation to take away so much of the groundwork that goes into running these kind of businesses?
Yeah, I love the Airbnb analogy. I saw a tweet that stood out to me, and it said, imagine if we didn't have hotels and all we had was Airbnb, and someone said to you, you could go in your room and you wouldn't have to clean up after yourself. You could order, believe it or not, you could order room service. You didn't have to cook for yourself. What an invention that would be, the hotel. And it was very satirical about how far sometimes we don't always innovate for better. Airbnb was this wonderful explosion when the value add was kind of unique and niche experiences that you had that were different, that put you in the heart of the community, or, and also cost a lot less. Today, you're right. Price was always a big part. You could have a better experience for less. And now it seems probably the antithesis, where maybe the hotel industry has the advantage, right?
I think you get this with like marketplace businesses. So like Airbnb, I think Shopify is another good example where they make it possible to build a business on top of them. They make it possible for people to make a lot of money by using their services. So loads of people realized they could make a lot of money by renting out apartments to Airbnb. What happened then is that you have this kind of like mini industry around people buying and renovating or building apartments which are purely just for renting out as an Airbnb. And 9 times out of 10, if you book an Airbnb now, you can kind of tell when it's a sole purpose Airbnb. Yeah. This isn't like a person's home. It's full of IKEA furniture. There's that like a New York skyline poster on the wall, which they got for $5 from Amazon. It just doesn't feel loved in. The pictures look great, and then you get there and it feels a little cold and a little soulless, a little heartless. And I think that's kind of ruined the Airbnb experience, which used to be you go into a little town in Italy and you stay in, somebody's beautiful cottage. And that is a unique experience. But now it's actually impossible to tell what are the apartments that have been built for this purpose. And I think it's an effect of Airbnb's success. And you're going to see it in other industries, probably like e-commerce, where there's a bunch of crap products floating around because there's this industry that's born out of people who can make a lot of money off these open marketplaces.
Couldn't agree more. You mentioned marketplaces and you mentioned products and services. I had a conversation with Mo Gawdat. So he's our chief AI officer, wonderful mind, best-selling author, wrote a book called Scary Smart in 2019 that optimistically spoke about the potential of AI, but also then warned us of some of the dangers and risks associated with such a profound technology. And Mo has a wonderful story, and I'll not go into it, but he has a life mission of making 1 billion people happy. He's an important voice for the industry. He's a wonderful soul, incredible mind, and every time I have a conversation with him, I feel incredibly privileged. And I had the opportunity just to kind of pick his brains and work through a couple of topics on our industry, advertising. I sometimes feel a little, it feels a little disingenuous of me sometimes, because I will ask Mo some questions, how I should be thinking about search, for example. And then by the end of it, we'll be talking about the impact on humanity. And it's very difficult then for me to route it back to Mid-Journey. You go to these grand lengths, but he's such a beautiful mind. One of the topics that we were chatting about was search and future of search. And it kind of ties nicely into Google, actually, this week, which will be last week by the time this comes out. But Google dropped, as part, I believe, their Samsung collaboration Android announcement, a new way to search. I thought, first and foremost, if you have not seen the announcement video, what a way to launch a product. I thought the execution of that product video was exceptional. And number two, a really interesting way. Think of search now as search being able to see and hear, and you can take pictures of landmarks and have it, connect you, and you can, look at someone's sneakers and say, can you get me something to pair with it? Just making search a lot more dynamic and creating generative features within our traditional behaviors. And the question I asked Mo was, what happens to search? And I'm not going to reveal too much because he kind of laid out a series of steps that we should be thinking about search and maybe the role of advertising or not. Bigger question, do you even need ads in this world? Probably not. But I wanted to get your perspective, because I know you've been paying close attention to the data and how search habits are evolving and how things like, Perplexity are now being used. But drop some knowledge, Catman.
Yeah, I think I agree, and I think they're two very connected subjects, AI and search SEO, and I think we're now seeing the effects of two things happening. So the first is, again, an industry that has been forming around SEO for the last 10, 15 years is now starting to have significant impact on the quality of SEO. There's actually a research paper released this week by a German team on Google SEO and the quality that has really decreased recently. And they found that it is just full of SEO spam. So people who have, gamed their products to be the top of an SEO ranking through fake reviews and fake content and now AI generated content as well. And so Google just isn't really built to handle this kind of industry which exists around increasing visibility on their search engine. And so two things I've noticed. I always like to, call on anecdotal data. So I have, there's a guy I work with every day, and he's younger than me, which is always a good signal in terms of having his finger on the pulse. And, he said to me, I don't use Google anymore. I use Perplexity. And Perplexity is like an AI search engine. It's basically built on top of ChatGPT, but has a very kind of smart internet browsing interface, and it also kind of gives you reference information from in a very kind of clear manner. And he told me he uses that exclusively, and he knows a bunch of his friends who are also the same. Because what a language model can do is it can deduce context, and it can sift through this kind of, like I said, spam and low quality content, and give you something which is catered more specifically to what you've asked for. So that's the first thing that's happening, is I'm hearing that people are switching from Google to search engine.
Quick one on that, just before you dive in. So it's interesting you describe the value add there of Perplexity being references, and I know our strategy and insight teams will do the same, because one of the big challenges with generative models is hallucinations, or fake information with complete conviction stated as fact, right? So now the references that support the information are really important. I noticed yesterday when I was playing on ChatGPT-4 that almost everything I asked was being referenced in Bing. So now I believe they're understanding this user behavior from defaulting to search now into chat interfaces. And if I say my honest opinion, I'm probably 25% on chatbots, 75% Google. I think in a year's time, extrapolate, it's probably more weighted towards chatbots. But I wanted to point that out, that I actually think in the very near future, search and chatbots become kind of one and the same. That transition's already happening in model, and I think it's going to roll out very quickly.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the questions we asked, I think on a few episodes ago, is, so what do you do for SEO in this kind of AI chatbot world? And I think the answer I gave was just keep doing what you're doing, which sounded dumb at the time, but beautifully put.
Honestly, was like, it was one of those moments, when someone says something so profound that you almost dream about it.
On the t-shirt.
Yeah, I don't want to blow smoke up your rear dude.
A really cool thing is that we could see how much traffic we get from, Perplexity, specifically that AI chat search engine. And we now have an exponential month-on-month growth of the number of people who are discovering Third Web, our company, through this chatbot. And we went onto the chatbot, we tried a bunch of different queries that are related to our company and our articles and our YouTube videos as well, which is really interesting. It's taking transcriptions from our YouTube videos. They're showing as the top references. And again, it's the same principles we applied to SEO that we are now cashing in on. And I think a lot of it is making sure the copy is really good and easy to understand, because then, these chatbots are taking direct quotes from your articles and they are restructuring them. So your language needs to be good, your English needs to be good. But also just having depth of information in these pieces as well, because there's so many, because now what people are doing is they're asking more specific questions. In Google, you used to kind of type, 3 words in to try and get a feel for what you're doing. Now people are asking very specific, detailed questions. And so you need to have the depth of knowledge in your pieces. And I think that's where we're winning, because I've noticed we're getting, referenced in these AI bots, but we weren't necessarily number 1, number 2 on the same search terms on Google. And so, I think it's now, we've been talking about this for a while. Now we're finally starting to see the very early innings of this change taking place.
What I love about that is what you're describing is a real behavioral shift. A lot of, I read a fair amount of psychological principles, and a well understood area of psychology is knowing how much the environment dictates how we behave. And I use an analogy to kind of, I suppose, illustrate that if I said to you, Caddy, and you hate metal music, and I put metal music on in a car for 1 day and that's all you could listen to, you'd hate it. For 3 days, you'd hate it. 7 days, you might start to get a like for it. After a month of only listening to metal music, you'd probably appreciate it and like it. The environment will dictate our behaviors, likes, wants, and needs much more than we like to admit. And if you think about shifting behaviors from these crude search, where we like put in odd keywords just to get an outcome, we now are training ourselves to be very specific. The digital world needs to adapt accordingly. In the same way, people saying TikTok is a search engine. I don't believe it's a search engine, but I think it has search capabilities. Meaning, if you now create content, you should think about the story arc, the language that you use, the copy that supports it in a really detailed depth way. I also think that about websites now. And if we are going to say the primary source of information that these chatbots churn out is predicated on how we talk about ourselves, how others talk about ourselves, every brand, company, and business should be very clear on who they are. And that's from their writing style, their tonality, the depth of their points. And I believe everybody should be going deeper. Really interesting. One of the main questions I got asked yesterday at this event was, this all sounds fascinating. We're speaking from our perspective. What are we going to do to acquire more users using AI? How are we going to use it to benefit business? And the question was, what about the audience? How are they going to be interfacing with this? And actually, that's the right question to ask, because when you start there, all your decisions that follow, mean you act accordingly. So I think there's something really interesting happening. And your advice that was, again, profound to some, I actually think isn't a terrible idea. But my one build would be that I actually think you have to pay more attention to those things.
Yeah. How much work does Flight Story do on copy and on like brand tone of voice and that kind of more linguistic side of marketing? Just out of curiosity.
We don't do as much as I think we probably should. So we will do a lot of copywriting and language in the context of content marketing. And if we work on social media campaigns or we're running a social channel for a brand, we'll try and establish some tonality and some structure. But as we're having this conversation, I'm rethinking where we maybe should be putting energy and resource and thought into, because the reality is anything I say today, anything you say is complete speculation because none of us know. But I would have to assume, based on history of how kind of channels, how social media changed the way we behave, how that environment like evolved. It's funny, someone in one of our internal chats, I think it was Pollyanna, shared like a clip, and it was like every out-of-home reference next to each other was referencing like in language on TikTok. Do you know what I mean? Like the internet has become omnipresent. Like think really boring, typical product ad, but they'd have a reference that was like an in-joke. What's the old one on TikTok? Like, I'm the CEO of.
Yeah.
Just goes to, that's old and tight. It shows how like what a boomer I am. Like I'm still using that, but then you get the idea. The in-jokes are now making their way even into the dullest, most mundane wallpaper advertising. And I think we should appreciate that.
Do you think that's a little bit lazy though? Like I agree that you see it everywhere now, that where trends kind of make their way into marketing, and that's probably where the trends go to die, right? But you're so right. I think TikTok has changed the English language more than any other platform, because it has this such a fast moving culture of just like it's a different language there. You go in the comments, and if you time traveled from 5 years ago, you wouldn't have a clue what people were saying. And so it's interesting to hear that it's kind of found its way in.
Yeah, I think we talk about often our kind of manifesto we call it social media 3.0. Social media 0.1 was like you broadcasted things, pictures, images, and people had this kind of passive relationship with brands. I'd click a like button. Then brands started to become more like media owners. They became a little more editorial in their nature. So they'd anchor emotion. And in response to that, you'd see a different expectation from customers and users and people. They start to want more and demand more from their brands, to not like be jarring in their feed. I don't just want to see product. I want to like interact with you like I interact with everyone else from like a pairing standpoint. The way we describe social media 3.0 is an ecosystem, which it's the language of the internet. It has its own codes, it has its own identities, it's built on niches, and Brands that focus solely on creating stories on their own channels are missing a trick, because how you're perceived and how others talk about you, that's key opinion leaders, that's creators, that's partnerships, that's media, this entire ecosystem that is the internet, all of those things are more influential. Your comments are more influential collectively than what you say about yourself through paid media and through, your start. So yeah, we obsess a lot around like the comments and rich, deep social listening when we're kind of advising brands to come up with a new social strategy. But yeah, it really is an intimidating place for brands to space, because you've got to think most decision makers, they're not living their lives through TikTok. They might spend 30 minutes casually scrolling, spend some time on YouTube, go on Instagram for 15 minutes a day in between doing things. But the rest of the world, everyone sub 25, is 100% living their world in a way, and it just seems totally foreign.
Yeah. I saw somebody describe a clothing brand, which I really like, brand called Brain Dead. And they were described as anti-algorithm, which I thought was an incredible way of describing a brand. So Brain Dead are very, very unique. They are this, they've always they're kind of a fashion brand that embraces like very cartoonish prints and graphics. They have a lot of kind of parallels with like comic book art. They just are so unique. They're very big in the rock climbing community. They do collaborations with very kind of alternative subculture type industries like card games, and the only way I could describe them is they really they march the beat of their own drum. They are completely outside of everything else. All of their collaborations are completely left field, but it's very, very unique to them, and it's very, very identifiable. You know when something is Brain Dead. And I just love the idea that they're a brand who they don't come in on a Monday morning and go, what's the latest TikTok trend? What's the latest Instagram thing? We need to get on it. They are themselves, and they have been incredibly successful through that. And I think about other marketing that has that same kind of anti-algorithm power, where they could drop something and it doesn't matter what time of day it is. It doesn't matter that it's optimized, the right image and all this stuff that we obsess over. They have built a brand that cuts through because people love them for who they are and they identify with who they are. You can probably say the same about the big brands like Nike. They don't need to play in trends. They don't need to kind of obsess over these finer details. They just do great work, and they do work that is very true to who they are. And yeah, I think that just like a light bulb went off when I saw that word anti-algorithm. And I think it's a good model for how, if you want to build something that lasts and you're not kind of always, obsessing over the algorithm, then I think that's a good framework to follow.
Yeah, I love it. And I think the underlying tone is being really distinctive and know who you are. I do this whole long kind of keynote about one of the biggest cardinal sins you do in marketing is not having a deep understanding of who you are. And I use examples like Ryanair. Ryanair know that they are no-frills, low-cost budget airline, so they don't pretend or profess to be anything other than that. By contrast, the fast food dilemma, where it's like Instagram versus reality. You have the actual fast food that you get and the image that is shown. And actually brands are today, and it speaks, I'm not going to use all these buzzwords about authenticity, but yeah, it's interesting when you describe that like new way where elite social teams behave. It's so unscheduled and it's so spontaneous, but it's just rooted in being creative and having a clear identity that's distinctive. We're trying to build a tool internally. We get, social media teams will use content calendars. Like you get a calendar of things that Mother's Day is coming up, or you name it. That's boring, but like cultural calendars. So Love Island is on. If you're a fashion and beauty brand, you're probably joining that conversation. And you're trying to compete for attention during these kind of cultural moments. You're inserting yourself in a conversation, right? And I thought, you know what? All the current systems are really naff. People still use spreadsheets. Surely with technology now, we can build some automation that drops into either people's Slack, a Slack bot, or creates a Chrome extension that adds value. And I mapped out this big manifesto internally, and I generally like broadcast, and then I like tag people who I want to pay attention. So I'll say, here's a brain dump, here's a problem we're trying to solve, here's why I think we should solve it, here's an ideal outcome. Can you look at this? Can you look at this? Can you look at this? And I made the cardinal sin. So I broadcast this thinking I've like cracked the code. And Ed comes back to me in our marketing team. He says, hey, because he used to work for like a social publisher. And I was like, hey, I don't think that's going to be valuable anymore, but I like the idea of thinking. And I was like, oh, great. Yeah. So I said, Jordan, who's a social media lead. And I said, what would be valuable in your life? And he reiterated and said, and I realized like what a mistake. I preach about listening to people and like being audience customer centric. I'm trying to build and come up with a tool that would be really helpful and aid social media managers. And I didn't speak to one of them. And I just realized like the contradiction in my own behaviors. But we're not perfect, Catman. I know you think I am, but I do have my flaws. I remember you sending me a newsletter to follow, which is kind of like Substack, Reddit-infused editorial, and it was called Garbage Day. And I found it really insightful. Sometimes I'm completely lost on the writings, and, it even confuses me, and I like to think I'm cool as fuck. But I read a take, and I loved it. It was about generative AI. And I'm going to read you what exactly was said, because I think this is fascinating. The headline was, AI is the digital equivalent of wearing a fake Chanel bag. You know what I realized about AI images in your marketing? It sends out a message that you've got no budget. It's the digital equivalent of wearing an obviously fake Chanel bag. Your whole brand immediately appears feeble and impoverished. What do you think, A, of that statement? Is that something you believe in? And B, if we're going to use generative AI images video, how do you not appear like a fake Chanel handbag?
I think it's pretty simple, actually. Any art style, any design style that becomes ubiquitous, so that becomes everywhere, immediately is cheap. Anything, and that's not just design, that's anything. Anything that is easy to produce, anything that is mass produced is always going to be perceived as being cheap and, readily available. And so when you have an art style, it's probably the first kind of art style like this. And the thing with AI is that you can kind of tell when it's AI, right? If you have a keen enough eye, you can kind of tell when it's being fully produced, right? Then I think it's completely true. You see a brand produce that and you think they spent 15 minutes making that and they spent $0 making that. And so, yeah, it does absolutely reflect badly on your brand. But obviously I think that when I listen to that, and I think we were talking about earlier, for me, the best use of AI is when it's completely invisible, right? So like if you've used AI to accelerate your workflow in some way, but then the end product is completely indistinguishable from a handcrafted, handmade thing, then that's great use of AI. And it isn't AI, it's just a thing someone's made. And so, yeah, I think completely agree with that statement. And I think it became old very quickly. That's the really interesting thing. This kind of like AI art wave was around for maybe 6 to 8 months before you look at it and you just kind of, ignore it or you see it as wallpaper. And so, yeah, completely agree with that statement. But I think it's slightly more nuanced. It's more, it's any assets that you can tell is AI. Because if you can't, then you can't.
Yeah, and look, it's the big question in the creative industry, right? When, sure, the bar in design and video and animation, when that's been raised and been democratized and made really accessible, what is the value of those things anymore? When we saw the first round of amazing CGI activations, we're blown away. We love it. We admire it. We respect it. And when it becomes, to your point, ubiquitous, it loses its value. And you're right. The strategy is about it being invisible. That's the key. But on the point, you said creative workflow, because that's been the biggest impact for us. is how do we leverage these technologies to improve our outcomes and then combine that with great fundamentals and great creative work, human work. Mo, he was telling me about one of his new books that he's writing. And he said he has completely reverse engineered the creative process of being an author. So one of the most amazing mathematicians, engineers' minds. And what does he do now? Writing his new book, he goes out and has conversations with people, films it, creates content. And then he uses AI to transcribe that content and take huge amounts of data. He will then process it through a MoGPT, his own model that he's created that's based on how he thinks, how he writes, the nuance, not a generic, ChatGPT reference, the nuance of him and how he writes. And then he will then create chapters through that process. And then he goes a step further, like a digital marketeer would, and he reiterates with sample groups. He has hundreds of people that read his books and comment and what they like and what they don't, almost like reinforced learning, the way that models historically are taught whether something's right or wrong or the outcomes are effective. He goes through that process, and I'm sure at a future state, that reinforced learning will be fully automated, and then he gets an outcome of a book. And I don't want to kind of say that he's not going to rewrite segments and change stuff and but he was describing an entirely new way of thinking about being an author. Traditionally, you have an idea, a thesis, you go explore that, you interview people, you use technology, search as a desktop aid to then go and discover, you read some books and blah, blah, blah. And that process takes months and months and months and months, and in many cases, years. With this process, it's much faster. The question then becomes, will the creative outcomes be better? And I'm sure many will argue today, no. I see so many people go, I used ChatGPT and it didn't kind of work. And it was like, a lot of journalists write this, actually. The potential is, oh, yes, it was so childish and generic. And I'm like, yes, because the inputs that you're putting in are childish and generic. If you're specific with reference points and tonality and learnings, you can get really good outcomes. And that's today, by the way. That's today. Give this 1 year and God, this is going to be insane. So yeah, I just thought that was just an anecdote I wanted to share because I was blown away by how he's injected it into his creative work as an author. I'm a marketeer, but as an author, I just thought that was wonderful.
What's probably going to happen is the most creative people, the smartest people are going to get more creative and more smart, and it's going to accrue to them. I think AI doesn't replace thinking. It doesn't replace creative thought. It helps you with your output and it helps with creative decisions. But the first steps that you have to take creatively it's not going to do that for you. There's still a blank canvas sat in front of you. And so I completely agree. I think the people like Mo who already have an incredible brain and know how to leverage these things, his output's going to be 10 times higher. Everyone else's isn't, because they don't know how to put the inputs in to get there. And so, I think everybody thinks there's going to be this kind of sudden, everyone's going to become an author. A good example is the latest recipient of, I think, the most prestigious Japanese literary award. She said that her work was, really unlocked by ChatGPT. So 5% of her book was written by ChatGPT, and she's won the Japanese literary award. And that's 5% isn't a huge amount, right? But it's probably, if you think about the amount of books she's going to write over time, probably going to get 2 or 3 more books out of her than she would have done before. And so, I think people when they, when this first kind of crazy time happened, we all thought that 95% of our books were going to be written by ChatGPT. Actually, it's going to be 5 and 10%, and it's going to mean that we get to read 1 more book in a lifetime, maybe. But I think it's those people who already are creative and already are, making stuff. They're going to make more stuff.
She's lying, bro. She's done more. If you admit 5%,
it's probably
5%. It's greater than that. It's way greater than that. Dude, to conclude, I want to get your take. Because, you are a savant for the creative arts, and you're not afraid to tell it as it is. Apple Vision Pro just released another update. They gave us a view into what's coming next. Catty's verdict, what we saying?
So it's like it's a product demo, right? Where we really get a deep dive into Apple Vision Pro, and this isn't a comment on the product. I haven't used the product. I don't know how good it's going to be. I think we've probably given previous opinions on it. I sat down and I watched this product demo video, and I thought, why do I hate this so much? Why is this so difficult to watch? And I think I finally boiled it down to, and this is a huge trend within the tech industry and a lot of industries, are when things are scripted to sound like they're not scripted. And so this is like, this person is speaking to the camera as if, it's a casual, normal day in her house. But she's obviously following this very kind of strict script. She's with her friend, and it's all kind of like, nah, very nice. But it's designed to sound like it's very casual, and they're not there to give a product demo. And he just threw this headset on. But it comes across as sounding kind of terrifyingly robotic and a little bit dystopian, and almost like they're selling you something very dangerous, but they want to dress it up in a fun and friendly way. And I just couldn't watch it. It's excruciating, and I think it's a trend we see in tech all the time, where they just want to make you believe that this isn't scripted, but you kind of have this huge gap between the two, which makes it just sound all fake and weird.
Bro, you've got steam coming out of your ears. I can see steam. Is that because it's so cold? Why is steam coming out of your ears?
That's totally.
Yeah, look, I watched it. I actually didn't watch the whole thing. I got 30 seconds into the thing, and I will say it disheartens me, a brand that I deeply love for their products, their services, their brand experience, the admiration I have for what they've built, one of the most iconic business models companies ever created, and they just produce that dribble. I also think it's quite symbolic. When I lived in America, I used to think the advertising was so bad. It just so naff and cheesy and insincere and fake. And this was just symbolic of all of that. And Tim Cook, incredible mind, finance brain, great operator clearly, but he needs a better CMO. Like, I don't want to throw shade, but who's making those decisions to sign that useless, awful video off? For your biggest hardware revolution in 10 years. Let's give it context. So the only hardware that you have introduced in a decade, and you give me that. Come on.
I think if you're going to do a product demo, do it on stage, do it in real time, do it live. I think that's like really having trust in your product. That's why I think people loved the iPhone reveal, is because he got it out of his pocket and he unlocked it and we saw it. When you have a video like that, you're hiding behind editing, you're hiding behind scripting and acting, and it just feels very disingenuous and did not make me want to buy the product. And so, yeah, I agree.
If anyone from Apple in the marketing team is listening, hire Flight Story. We'll do a better job.
Hire me as CMO. I think that's
if anyone from Third Web is listening, Catty's just stabbed you in the back. Catty has stabbed you in the back. Good chatting, dude. It's my Friday night. It's your Friday lunchtime. So I'm going to love you and leave you. But until next time.
Enjoy it.